So welcome everyone to our Fall 2025 Canada Wildfire webinar series. We're so happy to have you back after a long and very busy summer for many of the people who are here today. I'm really excited to introduce our fall series and start off with a really great project that's been going on for a long time. We're going to kind of be focusing in on some of the NSERC, Canada Wildfire NSERC Strategic Network projects this fall, and looking at some of the great work that's come out of the last 5 years of this program. So before I get started, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from Treaty 6 territory, the traditional land of many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. I live, I work, I play here, and I feel so honored to be able to do so. Today I have Eric Higgs and Jeanine with us. They're from the University of Victoria and the University of British Columbia, and they're going to be talking to us about a really fascinating and, dare I say, beautiful project called the Mountain Legacy Project. And they're going to be talking about it from many different perspectives today. I assume many people here are aware or know about the project. I see we have some Historical Society people here that might know a lot about it, but for those who are not, be prepared to be wowed. The photo series that you're going to be exposed to they're fascinating, both in terms of the visual of them and the legacy of the work that's gone into creating this amazing series of photo and data that we have going back quite far in time. So with that, I'm going to hand the presentation over to Eric. Eric, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here today. I'm going to leave it in your and Jeanine's hands. And just so everyone is aware, we will have some time at the end for question and discussion. So if you have anything come up, pop into your head, pop it in the chat box, and we'll table it for the end. And then we'll be able to have a really great discussion following. So Eric, off to you.
Thanks very much, Karen, and thanks, Emily, and everyone for making this event possible. I'm a professor at the University of Victoria, and I've been privileged to work on the Mountain Legacy Project since its inception back in the late 1990s. And this summer, I got to go back into the field, into our original field locations with the co-founder of the project, Jeanine Rhemtulla. So turn it over to you, Jeanine, for an introduction.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, and it's an incredible pleasure to be here. So I'm Jeanine Rhemtulla. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Forest and Conservation Sciences at UBC, University of British Columbia. And yeah, this project kicked off, well, we decided, what would you decide, Eric, 29 years ago. It started out as a master's project that I started when I was working with Eric back at the time of a fateful question that he asked me as a graduate student. He said, I want you to figure out what the valley of Jasper National Park looked like 100 years ago. And that's where all of this began, was in that question. And we've had many people support us through time. And it's been delightful this summer with the support of Canada Wildfire to be able to come back and work with some of the people that we originally met and with park managers and others. And so it's, yeah, it's a great pleasure to be able to talk a little bit today about the evolution of this project. And I think Eric is going to do most of it because he's been stewarding and directing the project for much of the last 25 years, but I will pop in where I can be helpful.
Great. Thanks, Jeanine. And what fun it is to be back together with you in the field and to do this presentation. So we're going to be talking about the Mountain Legacy Project specifically as regards its use in fire, understanding fire dynamics and fire management. This is something not entirely new to us, but we're really putting an emphasis on it for a couple of reasons. One is that we have sequential photography now. So for a long time, we had historical images and then repeat images. And now in some cases, especially in Jasper, we have a sequence of images now that show a different, like say, pre-fire and post-fire landscape, which is helpful. And the second thing we'll be featuring today is looking at some innovation, software innovation, that's allowing us to unpack these images in new ways. And that's where it gets exciting in terms of collaboration with fire scientists. And Jeanine, being in a faculty of forestry and a landscape ecologist, is all over these questions. And in fact, your thesis many years ago was sort of looking at, what would happen to this valley if fire were to get at it. So anyway, these questions have been with us for a long time. So I want to begin, first of all, with our own acknowledgement and understanding of how the work that we do supports Indigenous reconciliation and resurgence. We're the Mountain Legacy Project, the original images, what took place, as you'll see, the historical survey images, were a preeminent colonial archive. These were the images that were used to make the first topographic maps. So for resource extraction, building settler communities, and in some cases, displacing Indigenous peoples directly from their land. So it's a difficult archive. It's a difficult history. And some of the work that we're doing is trying to repurpose and reframe this work. So we're partnering with a couple of nations right now in Alberta, in what's now Alberta, so the Stoney Nakoda Nation and the Kainai Nation. So, and hopefully more in the future. I want also to acknowledge that the work that we present today is made possible by our two teams of researchers and lots of agencies and individuals. So Jeanine and I were able to bring our collective work together this summer. And in the summer, field work, we were supported enormously by Canada Wildfire. So the organization was definitive in making our work possible through providing financial support. We were delighted to have our own in-house meteorologist, Brian Weens. So thank you, Brian. Landon Shepherd at Jasper National Park provided unprecedented support for field operations. And we were able to work with one of the best mountain pilots in the business, Bob McDonald. And so the combination of those three types of support just made our work possible. And we had these crack field teams organized by a PhD student of mine, Claire Wright. And we welcomed the youngest member ever to the Mountain Legacy Project field teams, Amaya, who is Jeanine's daughter. So a new generation of people coming up to do this work. And we were our efforts were amplified through collaboration with Lori Daniels and her field team, who are with us in the field, and we did a lot of work together. And also Laura Chasmer, who supported us from a distance. It was great. And this double rainbow photograph was taken at the Athabasca Ranch, where we stayed. And we thank Jeanine and Lori's colleague, Harry Nelson, whose family owns the Athabasca Ranch, for providing one of the more memorable field facilities that we could ever hope for. So many of you have seen some of these images, not all of you, but this is the startling image of the Athabasca Glacier in 1917, taken by Arthur Wheeler as part of his interprovincial boundary survey. And we, of course, have witnessed, many of us have witnessed the change in that glacier. And it's one of the more telling portraits, especially in this International Year of Glacier Preservation, Glacier Awareness. So these are some of the most compelling types of images because they say to the public, look at what is happening before our eyes. But the story we want to tell today is maybe a more subtle story about landscape change and photography and historical work. So let's start with J.J. MacArthur, who was the very first phototopographical surveyor who started work in 1886 in what's now Banff National Park. And this is from 1891, about the plains of the 6 glaciers in Banff National Park. And there he is standing on the glacier. But what I want to show is just what remarkable images these are. So they were done on, I'll show in a moment, glass plates. But for the time and really to the present, these images have enormous detail and capacity for resolving things in the landscape. The historical photographs were all in the service of creating topographic maps. And we were the only country in the world really to embrace it and do it fully. The surveyors would climb mountains, take photographs, take angular measurements, go back to their office, typically in Calgary, and spend the winter making maps using plane tables and all the measurements that they had taken and the photographs, and they would draw out the topographic maps. It's kind of fascinating because in some ways, computationally, what we're doing in the present is repeating a lot of the techniques that were developed back then. And the computers are still not quite as swift as those surveyors were, and with all their ability to interpret data. That's another story, and we'll come back to it a little bit later. But it was all in service of creating highly accurate topographic maps. This one was from the area we're going to be talking about most today, which is the central part of Jasper National Park along the Athabasca River. This is from 1917. And if you can't see it probably, but one of the things you would notice in the legend is that they actually list right here triangulation and camera stations. So they were right embedded in those early maps. So brace yourself, Jeanine. This is what we looked like when we were doing our work in 1998. This is standing atop, I'm not sure, Wateron, I think. I think you were actually, if you look really subtly, we actually had tied you onto the mountaintop for this particular photograph. And you can see an old film camera. That's our 4x5-inch film camera, which we had a love-hate relationship with. And let's fast forward. Unfortunately, we couldn't get back to Wateron this summer to do a complete repeat photograph that showed our change through time, but this is the best I could do. So this is from the summer of 2025. And we're, that's me at the camera and Jeanine doing the notes. And we were able to spend a lot of great time together doing this field work. And as I mentioned, joined by our youngest field crew member ever. That's Amaya, the right. But we've been going back between the first work that we did in the late 90s and this summer, we've been doing a ton of work for, well, as Jeanine said, the last 20 some years, 25, more than 25 years. So this is field crews, field crew working in Kananaskis in 2014. This is one of my favorite photographs, Vladka Gat doing her finding an impossible photographic location, and it looks even more precarious than it really is. So the field work is the charismatic part. And behind the scenes is a lot of really hard archival work. So we've been partnering with these two remarkable individuals. I have to give them a shout out. So the woman on the right is Dr. Jill Delaney, just recently retired from Library and Archives Canada. She was the head of photographic collections and was an enormous support for the 24 years that we worked together directly. And now I'm working with her successor. We have the longest continuous research partnership with Library and Archives Canada in their history, which I'm really proud of. The man on the right is Rob Watt, retired Parks Canada employee. He worked for many years in Waterton Lakes National Park. And in the long, dark winters, when he was living in Waterton and Pincher Creek, he decided that he would dig into the historic collections. And he knows more about these collections than any human alive. It's remarkable, and he continues to work with us. In the background is the premier archival facility in Canada, and one of the finest in the world. It's the envy of many countries in the world, including those south of the border. It's the Gatineau Preservation Center. It's an architectural marvel, and it's has spectacular facilities for us to be able to work in. And we've been going back there and working painstakingly through the many collections that exist in the National Archives. And we've been appraising them, digitizing them, and then we have to link them together in a database to make sense of everything that we're bringing together. The photos there are so many of them. These are boxes of glass plate negatives. This is just a small sample of the boxes that we were assessing a year and a half ago when we were out in Ottawa. And each of those boxes contains, yes, plates of glass. And this is what they look like. So they're about 4 by 6 inches in size. And they're, the emulsion, of course, is on one side. Glass is fragile, but one of the great qualities is its stability. So glass does move around a bit over time, but it provides this incredibly durable base for the images, which is why we have such high resolution, high quality images more than a century later. We've been taking all of the historic images that we've been digitizing. We had to pioneer new techniques for digitizing these images. It's non-trivial to digitize glass plates and to figure out how to get every last bit of information off those plates. But we did that, and we put it all together with our repeat images, so the ones that we do in the field, into this open source, open access database called Mountain Legacy Explorer. So have at it, explore.mountainlegacy.ca. And if you're a bit of a photo geek or an historical geek, you can get lost for hours or days in this collection. But we have roughly 10,000 image pairs, now some sequences. So we've got 3, 4, and 5 layers of sequence of images. And we have about another 10,000 historical images that we have not yet repeated on this collection. But still, that's a fraction of the total collections. So even though we now boast the largest collection of systematic, comprehensive, and high-resolution mountain photographs in the world, we have a lot more to do. So they're comprehensive, of course. They cover most of the mountainous regions of Canada. But there's over 120,000 of the images. And as I said, we've looked at about 20,000 historical images, mostly in Alberta. And a big shout out to the FRIA program and West Fraser and other forest companies for supporting a major push on digitization. So we now are embarking on a 5-year process with Library and Archives Canada to digitize at ultra high resolution every last plate in what is now the province of Alberta. So that work is underway, just started earlier this year, and it will deliver some pretty exciting results over time. But as I mentioned already, the images are large format glass plate negatives, and we repeat them with state-of-the-shelf medium format digital cameras. So we're getting pretty high resolution repeat images. And finally, there's an unprecedented time depth, and that's one of the things that's kind of cool about the images, is that they go back earlier than even the earliest aerial photography. And there's another benefit, and we may talk about this later, Jeanine, I might just put a bug in your ear, is that we operated in the first decade or so of the project, maybe more, with the idea that the oblique images, the ones from mountaintops looking across the landscape, were inherently less valuable in some ways than aerial images, because aerial images kind of took over from the oblique images in terms of map making. But now we're discovering that the oblique images actually show the landscape in pretty high resolution, higher resolution in some cases than aerial imagery. But also in steep terrain, they show the highly topographic surfaces in better relief than we can see them through aerial images. So I don't know. Sorry, I said most of it, but you may want to come back to that point to emphasize it. If you're interested in podcasts, I really love the work that Future Ecologies did on our project a couple of years ago. It's a really engaging, I think, barely engaging conversation with a whole bunch of people, including Jeanine, around the project and how it developed and what it's doing. And then I just want to give a shout out to a book that's coming out later this year, University of Calgary Press. It's launching Friday, November 7th at the White Museum as part of the Banff Mountain Film and Book Festival. So the book is Mountain Voices, 50 authors speaking to 50 pairs of images. And I think there's at least a couple of authors who are on this call. I know Jeanine is. I think Bruce Mayer's here. I can't see everyone, but yeah, I'm really excited about this book. Let's turn to the images themselves and get to Jasper and get to Wildfire. So you've had lots of background. Now let me turn to this. So this is a sequence. These are stitched together panorama images taken from Old Fort Point, which is a popular and easy hiking destination just close to the town of Banff. You see the upper image from 1915 is showing the valley as Morris Bridgeland saw it, as a patchy, open, almost certainly fire-affected landscape that changed over the 80 or so years between the time that Bridgeland was there and when Jeanine and I went back in 1998. So what you're seeing in the middle image is a closed canopy lodgepole pine forest. When we went back to start thinking about this work again, and we were working with graduate student James Tricker, whose work we'll feature later, we, of course, saw the mountain pine beetle. This was at its kind of red stage peak, 2019. I think it had been roaring for a couple of years, but you could see just how extensive that mountain pine beetle infestation was. And it was an unprecedented one too. It had not been previously reported in Jasper. You've probably beaten down by the cold winters, but there hadn't been a history of mountain pine beetle the way there had been in further south, say in Banff. So it was, these were naive forests that the mountain pine beetle were chewing into, and the mortality was significant. This summer, we went back, and of course the pattern has changed again. So we had the before fire photograph with the mountain pine beetle, and now we have the post fire image. And I'll just spontaneously turn to you, Jeanine, for a second, and just, you've seen these landscape changes. Do you want to comment on them?
Sure. Yeah. And so maybe starting with the top one you've already mentioned, Eric, like in 1915, a valley that had seen significant historical fire, and a lot of it placed there by the stewardship of First Nations peoples, right, for various kinds of reasons, and then 100 or 80 years of fire suppression, and then the mountain pine beetle, like Eric mentioned, and now we see the fire come in. And I don't know, Eric, if maybe you can, can you put your pointer over where the Jasper Park Lodge is, so people for people that aren't familiar with this landscape? And earlier you actually said Banff town site, but this is Jasper we're looking at. So there's Jasper.
Oh, sorry, Jasper. Did I? Oh,
yeah, that's okay. I figured people would know. So right in the very center part, I can't see your pointer, but anyway, the very center part of the image is kind of where, yeah, there you go, where the Jasper Park town site is. And then if you look to Jasper Park Lodge, and I have a very bright office this morning, so it's actually kind of difficult to see, but right through there, you can see the effects of the fire going through. There's still standing trees, but you can see that they're dead, and it's not just kind of like the gray stage of the pine beetle, but that is actually fire all the way through there. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And maybe just keep on. I'm going to go to the Powerhouse Cliff images, Jeanine,
sure,
and walk through this sequence. So this is your favorite series of images, I think.
It is my favorite series. And I'll say that one of the things I love about these, we teach, obviously we're professors. And so I just love these images because they allow people to see the landscape the way that we see landscapes, and not kind of the top-down aerial images. And so this is an image that's taken, it is just west of the town site. So if you're driving from the town site of Jasper towards Edmonton, some of you will know there's like a transfer station there. There's it's kind of off to the left, and if you go there, what you're seeing there is it's the original train line that went through there, and so it isn't a tourist destination at all, but you can pull off and park there and jump over the railway tracks and just climb up this little bench area. And so we're looking, I guess we're looking kind of northeast towards Edmonton, up the Athabasca, or down the Athabasca Valley, and so what you're looking at is the flat side of the Athabasca Valley. That's the Athabasca River there. And again, in 1915, a very heterogeneous landscape that was kind of mixed. It's lodgepole pine in there. There would have been some Doug fir in there as well, but then you've got spotty areas that are kind of like with shrublands or meadows. And so historically, there would have been meadow areas in here as well. And you can look across the valley as well to see kind of the tree line on the other side up those mountains. That's Hawk Mountain and Morrow Peak in the distance, for those that know. I'm going to bring up the next picture, Eric.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's the same thing, like basically 80 years later, and you can just see the infill with that lodgepole pine. And so it's just a continuous blanket of lodgepole pine. Lodgepole pine that would have gotten started. There was historically large fires that happened in the park in 1889 and 1905. So much of the trees that we're seeing here would have been about 90 to 100 years old. And again, heterogeneous, continuous fuels, and also continuous food for the mountain pine beetle, which I think is going to be the next picture. Yeah, there you go. And again, it's in my office, it's too bright this morning, but it is quite red, and hopefully you're able to see the redness come out on that picture on your screen wherever you are.
Yeah,
no,
not this one.
2011.
This is 2011. Yeah, it's so bright on your screen. Yeah, this is 2011. So this is we're back just 12 years after those original images.
Okay, so that's supposed to be green.
Yeah, there you go. There's the red.
The red, and there's some gray in there as well. And so the mountain pine beetle was quite extensive for people that know Jasper. And you can just see the extent of it right there. And there you go, is the picture we took this past summer.
Yeah. So just the,
yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Right. So this is one of those stations where we have sequential photography and able to get pre and post fire effects and look at some of the mountain pine beetle infestation as well. One of the more poignant images, do you want to say anything more about this, Jeanine, before I move?
Nope.
Okay. One of the more poignant images was taken from Mount Hardesty. This was not a photographic location that we had visited in the late 1990s. It was a new one for us. It was a new collection that we had found at the National Archives. And it was a part of a different topographic survey. And this Claire Wright, the PhD student, and her team was up there 10 days before the breakout of the Jasper wildfire complex. And they left the town of Jasper fortuitously 3 days before the fire. But this image is remarkable because this panorama stitch that we've done shows the fire origin point just south of here near Kirkeslin and the Athabasca Valley moving all the way up to the town of Jasper there. And we were able to go back and repeat that this summer. And you can look at the fire effects. This is the new mountain caribou pen, I believe. Shows up a little bit better here, just for orientation. But a remarkable and powerful set of images for us. And jump in anytime, Jeanine, if you want to comment on these images, please. This is Signal Mountain, which is right over top of the town of Jasper. It's the terminus of the Skyline Trail, so it's walked by a lot of people looking across at Roche Bonhomme. And this is the Athabasca Valley. The town's just over here. This is sort of Jasper Park Lodge territory in 1915. And this is what it looked like in 2025 when we went back. Do you want to say anything about this, Jeanine? No, this is kind of overwhelming. But yeah, you can see the fire has burned through a good part of this particular part of the valley. When we were out this summer, we had the privilege of being shadowed by two people documenting our work and the work of Laurie Daniels' team. And some of you may have seen this article in the New York Times on September 1st that was written by Jesse Winter, a journalist who did a really fine job looking at the Jasper wildfire complex and was able to join us in the field as well as Laurie. And our field exploits were memorable this summer. I just thought I'd throw a few more slides in there about the work we did. Excuse me. So this is sort of the triumphant team at the top. This is a less triumphant team. Do you remember me, Jeanine, trying to figure out how on earth that the camera is actually located right where that stupid orange pole was? And we couldn't take the pole out. So we had to try to get our photographs in and around that pole. This is at the top of Marmot Mountain. So we had two field crews operating with helicopter support this summer. That's Claire Wright on the left eating a sandwich, Lee Johnson and Sam Bolken-Kern, who's a graduate student from the University of Amsterdam, who's been visiting us. And then our team, that's me, sadly, in this selfie. Apparently I'm not that talented a selfie taker. And Jeanine, this is Amaya, who we mentioned earlier, and Desiree Patterson, who is an artist and photographer who is shadowing us for this and took, I think, thousands of photographs. I probably should have featured her photographs, not this one. But what was interesting about the summer's field work was the collaboration that we were able to have with Laurie Daniels. That's Laurie on the left, and being able to work with her crews and talk to Laurie about what she was seeing on the landscape. And as we were flying over some of these stations, the stories were really dramatic in terms of what we were seeing, things that we had not imagined seeing before. So this is a photograph I took in one of the more significantly affected areas. Trying to remember exactly the location, but it's well south of the town of Jasper. And here we're seeing the wind effects from the fire. And there are people who I'm sure on the call who know more about the dynamics of this than I do, but these are backdraft winds that were pulling trees out of the ground. You can see root balls there, and you can see chaotic wind forces in certain parts of the image up here, and just an awful lot going on. It was, my understanding is a report is coming out soon from the Canadian Forest Service that's going to be looking at the fire dynamics from the 2024 wildfire complex, but it was certainly arresting and memorable and kind of shocking. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Jeanine, and you may want to comment on what you saw as well, but before we get to the next photographs.
Yeah, I think this was a photo we took back on the day coming back from Edith Cavell, right? We were lucky to have some significant helicopter support, which is what made it possible for us to reshoot as many of the images as we did. And so I think that was the day we were flying back from there towards the town site. And I think the thing that shocked me was just how many of the trees, and I think you're seeing it here as well, with the white, like the trees, basically the bark was blown off the trees by the intensity of the winds, which was really incredible. And Jesse Winters, the journalist who was with us, who published that piece in the New York Times, while he was there, he dropped a note to the photo editor at the Globe and Mail with some of his photographs, just saying, you know, I'm thinking of writing a paper, would you be, or writing a piece for the Globe, would you be interested? And their photo editor came back and said, well, this doesn't look like a fire. This is not what a fire looks like. And I think for me, that's really stayed very strongly with me as a kind of way, a way of kind of encapsulating just how much fire has changed, that this fire doesn't look like a fire. And we were seeing that all over the place.
Cool. Let me go to the next photo. The next one's here. So over to you.
Yeah, great. So Eric's asked me to talk a little bit about the analysis that we can do from these photographs. And so these photographs, as I mentioned before, and obviously it's obvious, right? They're oblique images. So they're taken at an angle looking down over a valley. And so that makes them hugely powerful as visual imagery to be able to communicate to people how things have changed through time, right? It's a natural way that we know to see the landscape. It's a way that connects very deeply with audiences. So I use them all the time in teaching. Parks Canada and Jasper has had versions of our photographs up on you know, the various educational materials and the signage that they do through the park, because they really connect with the public and with tourists. And so it's really powerful from that perspective. But obviously, as scientists, if we are trying to do something more quantitative with the pictures, and we're trying to use the pictures as data that we can kind of turn into numbers to understand in a more detailed way how landscapes have changed, then we need to figure out, well, how do we actually work with these images to be able to georeference them and compare them more quantitatively. And it's a little bit ironic because, as Eric mentioned at the beginning, these photographs were originally taken to be able to create the first topographic maps of the park. And so they took these maps, they took the pictures at these oblique angles, they took measurements, and then they went back and, like Eric said, they spent their long winters doing what would have been tedious trigonometry and doing it all by hand to basically turn these things into proper georeferenced topographic maps. Over the space of 80 years, I guess the young graduate students no longer want to do that kind of math by hand. And so we haven't had an easy way to be able to turn these pictures into aerial top-down kind of aerial georeferenced imagery that we can analyze using the methods that we use for other properly rectified imagery, like air photos or satellite imagery. And so what we have we've got, like, there's a 1915 picture on the left and a 2020 picture on the right. And maybe you can bring up, yeah. And so in the original work that I did 29 years ago, we classified the image, or I classified the imagery using the old-fashioned techniques of just drawing little polygons around the images to be able to separate and make a land cover map out of them. And then we went through the kind of exercise of being able to compare that to understand a little bit more quantitatively what landscape change looked like. And so over the last, I would say 10 or 15 years, Eric has had a number of graduate students who've looked to automate that process in different ways and to build on it. And so here what you're looking at is an automated classifier that James Tricker's PhD student who recently graduated has put together to basically analyze the imagery through time. We call it PyLC. It's a Python land classifier, and you can see on the bottom here what the classifier basically does. And so it's an automated classification algorithm that goes through and can separate the image into the different land cover classes. Feel free to jump in anytime, Eric, if I'm
Sure.
missing
Do you want me
things.
to go to the next image?
Yeah, sure. Okay, and so that's really great, but now what we actually want to do is to be able to drape that over over the actual landscape so we can understand where these pixels are on the actual landscape. And remembering that when you look at an oblique picture, things that are in the foreground are actually taking up less physical space than things that are off in the background. And so that's what we're trying to correct for. And so James and now Claire has updated this, have been working on methods for doing that. And so they've come up with this remarkable way of doing it that's it's pretty cool. And so you start with, in a geographic information system, you start with a digital surface model. And so that's what you're seeing on the left-hand side, the top there. To create a hillshade model that you can then, and so you're looking, and maybe Eric, you can use your pointer there. You've got a camera location. So if you're sitting inside your software, you know where the camera is, you know where it is that you're looking out over the landscape, and you can build that field of view. So that little orange kind of triangle area there is what the camera is seeing. You can build a surface, you take a digital surface model, you build a hillshade model, and then you ask the computer to show you what would this vantage point look like if I was actually standing here. And the big picture you see on the right, the virtual photograph. So that looks like a real photograph, but it is actually a virtual photograph that is built within the software, just using that digital surface model and the hillshade model. So it's quite spectacular. So once we have that, if you want to go to the next slide, Eric, then we can take that image, that classified image that we have. And again, so you can think of that on the lower left there, that's the classified image that we have. And you can drape that onto your actual landscape. And so what you're seeing on the right there is that kind of draping of it. In places where there's holes, those are areas that we're not able to see because there'll be some kind of feature that's blocking it. So maybe it's something that's behind a hill in the distance. You want to go on to the next one. And then we can align or repeat in our virtual photograph. So on the left-hand side, you have a repeat photograph. On the right-hand side, we have that virtual photograph. And then for anybody that's done any kind of georectification, this is kind of the standard thing. You find the same feature in both images, and you point it out to the computer software, and you say, match this point to that point, and then it will do its rubber sheeting to bring those two images together. And then you can now drape whatever your classified image is onto the landscape. I'm going to go to the next one, Eric. So James did this this is in the central part of Jasper National Park in the Athabasca Valley. So what you're seeing in red there are all of the different camera stations. Yeah, so Morrow Peak, Mount Greenock, Mount Esplanade, the Palisade. I'm surprised that the Powerhouse Cliff isn't there, but it would be right below the Palisade somewhere. Maybe he didn't use those photographs.
Right.
Yeah, we would have been right there. Those are the pictures we were looking at earlier. And so you can take all of the pictures that you take from this area and do that process that I just said. So you do the aligning of the two photographs, you build your hillshade, and you project those land cover classifications over onto the landscape. And so then you can take a look and see, obviously, because you're taking pictures from various vantage points, there's going to be areas of overlap in the landscape. And so that's that map where Eric is putting his little his pointer. And so you can see in some places we've got relatively little overlap. We'll only have one or maybe two photographs that see the area. In other places, you've got significant overlap. And so then you can take all of the classified images that you've done, you drape them, then you'll have some kind of rule for if you've got multiple images in a place, you can pick, like if it's been classified as forest, for example, in 5 images and something else elsewhere, you can decide that elsewhere one is just within the realm of variability. And so you can do a rule where you pick the one that's most common. Yeah, and then you can do the next one. Next slide.
I just wanted to point out though, just point out that the yellow boundary here actually accords with the original research area that you chose for your master's thesis research back in the late 90s. So that is, so James picked up and used the same boundary.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so this is kind of the results of the first round of the work that James did. And so you can see in the left-hand side, that's just an aerial image of what the study area looks like. In the middle picture is the classified, and geo-rectified repeat images that have been put together. And on the right-hand side, he's done the same thing, but using satellite imagery. And so we've been kind of comparing and working on these methods just to see how well they align. And in general, the alignment is really good. And it's just in some places where we're still able to pick up a greater level of detail or resolution in the aerial imagery than we are in our repeat photographs. But I think part of that is because our repeat photographs are kind of printed in small size. And I think if we were able to zoom in or start zooming in on those, I think we would start to see similar levels of resolution. You want the next picture, Eric?
There we go.
Yeah, and so and this is then building on that work, James has kind of extended the study area. So if you see, this is the new study area. And again, Eric, the top part of that is the area we're looking at before. And now we have the rest of the study area that's moving east around. So there's the town site that'll be right in the middle there somewhere. And then out east towards the eastern boundary, or the western boundary rather, of the park. And so he has classified and then quantified the land cover. And so you can see in 1915 that a lot of that is in purple. So that's that early regenerating conifer that we saw in so many of the pictures. And then the light green color is shrub. And then the darker green is mature conifer with a mix of other land cover types in between. And I think, Eric, you got the next one is the contemporary. So that's 2020 after a century of fire suppression. And obviously you saw already in the photographs exactly what the change in that landscape was. So much more mature conifer, but now we're actually able to be able to quantify that. And again, to put a point that Eric mentioned earlier, right? Like 1915 predates any other kind of aerial imagery that we have. And so the only other way that we can go back and try to reconstruct some of that is using some of the techniques that Laurie Daniels uses with Denver chronology, for example, but the resolution on that is not nearly what we have with the photographs. And so we're really able now to map in much higher detail what that change looks like through time. And there's one more photograph. And so that's 2022 following the mountain pine beetle. And what you're seeing in gray there is mountain pine beetle affected conifer in lots of areas, and still a lot of mature conifer. And hopefully by this time next year, we might actually have another image up there where we can show the areas that were affected by fire.
Right. Yeah, that's great. And just, I'm always kind of struck when I look at the 1915 composite land cover map that James produced. Was just, we've never seen anything like that before. We don't have anything on record from that time. So it's kind of cool. Right, and just to talk a little bit about accuracy, because the work that you were speaking about a couple slides ago was really about testing the accuracy of this technique, because we didn't know how well it would do, how well it would perform. But it turns out in the tests that James did and published in Remote Sensing and Ecology and Conservation that we are getting accuracies within a few meters of what's on the ground. So that's impressive. We're happy with that. Let me just bring the presentation home by looking at how we've consolidated the software. So I think it's fair to say that James was working with software that was kind of cobbled together in different ways. We had this Python land classifier that was developed by a graduate student, turned out to way overachieve in terms of its performance and what it was able to do, but it was a pretty clunky piece of software. And then we, and some of the mosaicing work and his work with digital virtual images and so on was all kind of, pulled together from different sources. And what Claire Wright, a PhD student who's working with us now, has been able to do is to develop a suite of software that is working within QGIS, the open source spatial analysis software. And it's all available. I just want to say this, I'll say it later, but it's all available to use. Maybe not always for the faint of heart, but it's out there. It's open source. This is our site on GitHub. So Claire's work, she published it on this last year. This mountain image analysis suite has a series of tools that allow us to work through more or less what Jeanine covered, but doing so in an ordered and pretty smooth flow. So the first part is the classification work. This is using machine learning trained on 280 manually classified images, which spanned 7 years of effort. but it's a trained set of data. And it's delivering quite decent results. So James Tricker was reporting reasonable accuracy. It's not fair to say it's a totally automated process. It's a semi-automated process, because we always are back looking at these images and doing some error correction on them. There's a really sweet tool that Claire built that allows for the georeferencing now for the building of those virtual photographs and altering the image to look as though it was from the original optical photograph on the left. This is a virtual photograph on the right. And then aligning, like comparing and getting those points together. So that process that Jeanine described earlier is now built into a much smoother kind of workflow. And we can contrast and compare the overlay of the optical image, almost called it the real image, the optical image with the virtual image. And of course, using the land classified versions of these, we can now then overlay that with reasonable accuracy and some pretty powerful visual tools as well. So Claire's done some really nice work with hill shading and partial transparency to kind of show what it looks like. So there's a lot of potential coming on this. Now that's a draped, on the left is the draped model. You can see it over top. This is what we're seeing in the classified image from the so-called photographer's vantage point. And this is what it looks like as it's laid down over top of the landscape. But the real, I think one of the great benefits of the systematic collection we have is the fact that they're all triangulated images. So we have so many from different vantage points, which makes the mosaicing part really important. So this is another plugin that Claire's developed, and we can, she's developed two techniques for being able to overlap or mosaic these images, probability-based and a rank mode. I won't go into details on that. And Claire, by the way, wishes she could join us, but she's on a flight to Germany today to present at the International Mountain Conference. So a pretty good excuse. So we have the second image overlaid here. You can start to see how two cameras are now, classified images are now overlaid and mosaic together, and you can just keep repeating that. So Claire's work is starting in Waterton Lakes National Park, and she'll be moving to do her next major project up in Jasper shortly. But she doesn't have results from Jasper yet, but this is what she's been able to do in Waterton Lakes National Park. So create a very high resolution map. This is in the blood timber limit and the eastern edge of Waterton Lakes National Park, and looking at the 1914 land cover map. And she's also classified aerial photographs in sequence between these two. So she has an almost decadal record of landscape change with some pretty remarkable findings early. I mean, she hasn't published on this yet, but she's noticing some things like prescribed fire having very little effect on aspen, that previously grassland converted to aspen, recovered to aspen following this big sofa fire that occurred in Waterton in the late 90s. There's the grassland recovery seems to be strong following the Kino wildfire. So anyway, lots of interesting observations and findings coming out of that work in the next few months and the next year. So anyway, just to give you another locale, another set of fires, and lots to learn about as we extend our collaborations with fire scientists. So I'm going to wrap up with this image. This is from a really memorable mountain called Excelsior. And Jeanine and I remember it with some mixed fondness from 1999 when we had to climb what our helicopter pilot this summer called the largest pile of boulders on the planet. Because it is nothing stays still and it's all boulders. But it provided us with the most remarkable view across the valley to that Signal Mountain, and then just tucked in behind is the town of Jasper. So I'll leave it there. Jeanine, do you want to wrap up with any comments? Are you good?
Nope, all good.
Well, thanks everyone. I'm very happy to take questions.
Thanks, Jeanine and Eric. That was so great. One thing I have to say is no matter how many times I hear about Mountain Legacy or talk to there have been so many people that have worked on various facets of this project over the years, but it continues to astound me. And I think in some ways, maybe because you're in it so much, dare I say, you almost downplay the complexity of it. It's astounding to me. And I think one thing that people, and I didn't understand this after spending a bit of time with Claire and James and Jasper this spring, just the profound amount of work, planning, logistics, physical fitness required to do and maintain this photo series. It's amazing and such a credit to your group that you're able to kind of shepherd that through and keep it going and finding people who are kind of the right people for the job, because man, it is a labor of passion and love, I have to say. And so thank you so much for sharing with us. Anyone that has questions or comments, you can put them in the chat box if you would like to, and if you're comfortable, you're also welcome to unmute and participate that way. Just let you know though, we are recording, so if you do unmute and turn on your camera, you will be a part of the recording here. Before I ask my first question, Eric and Jeanine, did you have anything that you wanted to chime in before I start rambling away? No?
Well, we can ramble
I'd just
forever.
say that I see Brian's on the call, and we could ramble forever, but I just wanted to say, Brian, I've been in withdrawal, not having daily weather updates for the mountains. Just letting you know.
And I'll say too, if people are interested, like we can talk more also. We haven't talked a lot about the actual field work, but sometimes people are just like, oh, you go to the top of the mountain, you take a picture, and it's not quite that simple. It can take hours when you're on top of mountains to figure out exactly where those pictures are, but happy to talk some more about that. But looks like there's questions already. So
Brian, did you want to chime in first before I go to the first question here?
No, I just wanted to say that just having the opportunity to support that operation was an absolute thrill from my side. It would have been way more fun if I'd been at the base of the mountain, but even doing it remotely, it was a great opportunity to collaborate.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Brian.
this summer I think was a great example of like how well collaboration and interagency work and just those partnerships and leveraging can really result in some really great outcomes. So, Chris, I see you have your hand up. Feel free to unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. I guess less of a question and more of a comment. So I am the FireSmart coordinator for the town of Banff. And what I've been hearing a lot from residents around the town, this legacy project, I think they have an exhibit maybe at the White Museum here in town, but the word has been getting out that these comparative photos, historical photos and recent ones, show the difference in the landscape and just the effects of really good fire suppression has had on our landscape and how it's changed. So just using it as a tool for some of our FireSmart initiatives, because a comment I hear a lot is, well, I moved here because I love the forest and I want to keep it natural. I don't want it to change. And I say, well, it's not natural anymore. You know, we got really good at putting out fires in a biome that needs wildfire once in a while. So thank you for putting this together, and just know for anyone else in a position similar to mine, you use this tool to kind of get that education across to your residents to hopefully take some FireSmart action. So thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks for that.
Eric and Jeanine, I don't know if you want to talk to, the public communication potential of this photo series a bit.
yeah, I think I mentioned something already, and for me, that's really one of the most powerful things. And so I use them all the time in my classroom. Also, and it was interesting, Chris, that you mentioned that that this is not natural for the landscape, like what it looked like before was natural. But of course, especially in Jasper, a lot of what the landscape looked like in the early 1900s was a product of millennia of Indigenous stewardship. And so for me anyway, teaching conservation here, it allows us to have some really good discussions about what does it mean to be natural, and why do landscapes change, and how have these things changed, and what is it about who we are now and what we want to see on landscapes. And so I think it can get into a lot of those really good philosophical discussions as well. And yeah, Chris, I agree completely. I often put the pictures up side by side, and I don't tell the students which is the old one and which is the new one. And I asked them to guess. And it's incredible how many students are just like, well, the 1915 photograph, that's got to be today because we clear cut everything. And that's what our landscapes look like today. And so again, yeah, I would agree. I think it's really powerful, and it's really great to hear that they're being useful in Banff as well. And Eric, I don't know, you guys have been taking more, I've really been involved mostly with the Jasper stuff, but you've been involved with so many more pictures taken in other places. And I don't know what other plans there are for other communities to go to. Maybe you can give a bit of all the places you've worked.
Yeah. Can I tell a funny story though about your about showing those images? When we were just starting out, the very first year we did this work, we were asked to do a poster presentation back in the days when posters were really manual. And we had printed up little photographs of the historic and our repeat image, and we had them on Velcro attached to the board. And Jeanine and I had to step out for a while, and we asked a colleague in mechanical engineering, who was a bit mischievous, to look after our booth for us. And so we hadn't had a lot of traffic. We were in kind of a bad location in this poster session. And I'm coming back from lunch, and there's a throng of people around our booth. And my mischievous colleague had managed to drum up a lot of interest by reversing the images and saying, look at how messy and look at how destroyed this landscape is now. Look at how patchy and open it is. And he was showing the historical photograph in place of the repeat photograph. So it was really quite something to just get a sense of how people shift their perceptions and views of the landscape with these images. So we've thought of them as visual arguments, ways of being able to make a case for what's happening on the landscape. And that works in public forums and also in scientific forums. And Chris, maybe I can just say that I think there's a lot more social science work that needs to be done to understand people's perception of change over time, especially in relation to wildfire. There's some work out, but more could come. I remember Rick Kubian and the work that he was doing in Kootenai National Park with the red streak restoration work they did. So they went and did a lot of forest thinning right up against, I think, the biggest campground in Kootenai National Park at Red Streak. And it had been a pretty close canopy forest prior, and they went in and intensively managed and mechanically thinned, and then started doing low intensity frequent fire in that area. But they followed it up with surveys of the people who were visiting the campground. And the first year there was shock, especially from the people who would go there every year for their camping experience. And the next year there was less shock. And 3 and 4 years later, people just were part of this changed landscape. And so it'd be interesting to know how public perception changes in relation to this and how we can work on managing or directing that a little bit. It's not my area, but it's fascinating. Anyway, Jeanine, you wanted me to say something about something in particular. Now I've forgotten.
I don't remember. No, it's all good.
Okay. All right.
I think she had asked you if you could talk about all of the different locations that you've worked.
Oh,
I don't know
that's
if
right.
you want to
Yeah, right.
go into that or not.
So, yeah, no, sorry. Yeah, so we're about 13,500, no, more than that, closer to 16,000 images in Alberta. And we're not quite sure, around 15,000 maybe in Yukon territory, including the Alaska Yukon Boundary Survey, which has about between 6,000 and 8,000 images from the 1890s, so really early. And then British Columbia probably has the mother lode, right? We're somewhere between 70 and 90,000 images in British Columbia, of which we have tackled just a tiny little percentage. And it's a long, complicated story why Alberta has been privileged. It's all good stories. A lot has to do with Bruce Mayer, who was a big champion of the work that we did and really supported us. But there's just a whole lot of work to be done throughout the Mountain West. And for a long time, we were doing kind of systematic research related repeat photography. And what we're looking at now is expanding this so that we can kind of partially crowdsource some of this work. There's just too much to be done. And very interested in working on monitoring. So we've developed monitoring protocols used for repeat photography, got a draft training manual that we worked up with Waterton Lakes National Park. Because we think for communities like Banff and Jasper and mountain communities or forest-dependent mountain communities throughout Western Canada, that there will be communities wanting to track change, and the repeat photography, sequential repeat photography is such a relatively easy and powerful way of doing it. So there's just an awful lot of work to come, probably well past my active professional lifetime. So, but anyway, we're looking at different ways of expanding the work that we're doing and creating long-term stability for it.
Thanks, Eric and Jeanine. So there is a question in the chat box. Alex is asking, what exactly is required to convert the oblique images into data? With the curiosity of if it could open the opportunity for citizen scientists, photographers to cover more ground.
Do you want to tackle that, Jeanine?
Oh, why don't you take it? It's a nice segue for what you were just saying about hoping to crowdsource and stuff. So what are you thinking with that?
Yeah, so I would say right now, Alex, that the software that Claire has developed and posted is in its early development stage. It's highly useful, usable software, but probably not, exactly plug and play. So you'd have to be someone who's done a little bit of work with GIS and know your way around file naming conventions and moving images and files around. But fundamentally, it's getting toward the point where we can have this as a toolkit that people can use for annotating and comparing images. And so we're getting there. It will take some more development push. As I've learned, I apparently knew nothing about software development until about 5 years ago, and now I know more than I want to. But apparently the next step for going from this fully operable software suite into something that's very publicly useful is a pretty big step, but we are thinking about it. So being able to take the photographs is probably the first and most important step. So being able to figure out in a community where there are vantage points that are key lookouts across the landscape, and where those might be available in the long term. So areas that you have unobstructed views, mountaintops or promontories of one kind or another. And then working with us to figure out if there's historic images in those areas. Sometimes there's not, often there is. And if there isn't, then you can create your own reference photography. And we've done that a little bit in Waterton, where there are locations that don't have any survey photographs, like the Prince of Wales Hill, where the Prince of Wales Hotel is. It's such an iconic place, but the surveyors didn't care about it. So there were no photographs on this. So we created a reference set of photographs. So in effect, like historical images going forward. So there's a lot of potential at the community level for being able to document landscape change that way, potentially partnering with us to be able to host those images. So we're looking at strategies for digital permanence, so these collections can migrate into the future, and I'm hoping to be a source for people wanting to study this for a long time. So I don't know, Alex, do you want to, is that helpful? Do you want to say anything directly to that?
Yeah, I guess it's just like, thank you for the answer. I was just wondering, I guess, is particular, like anyone kind of looking to take a photograph, like would there be any like particular, like maybe specialized equipment or like certain accuracy, say for like GPS they might need for like their input to be useful towards this data set?
So yes, but I think we can back off a little bit from the perfectionism that's occupied our repeat photography work, where we've got specialized cameras and specialized tripod mounts and high resolution GPS units and that sort of thing. That's not all necessary. And these days, not all digital cameras are created equal by any stretch, but a lot of accessible, so-called prosumer cameras are really adequate for this work, provide high resolution images. I think keeping cameras on level, documenting the azimuth of the direction that it is, even if it's within just plus or minus 5 degrees is fine, helps. If you've got better GPS coordinates, that helps. And then taking field notes. We have ways in which we take field notes, and what we're hoping to do with crowdsourcing in the future is creating a simple app that will allow people to upload those data. So yeah, we're we have to do a lot of on the ground work with people. We tried this with someone who'd never done repeat photography in Waterton Lakes National Park last year. And we learned a lot about what people understand about photography and how they think about it. And we have to do a lot more of that to sort of tweak how we can communicate this to people, but totally doable, totally doable.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, even iPhones. Well, I don't know. Skeptical, but there you go.
Thanks for that question, Alex. I have to say that maybe it's just years of talking with people that have worked on the geoprocessing side of these images. That's amazing that you're looking at options for that. It's not something I was aware of. I know, chatting with people over the years, and they really were fixated in on that exact location and the camera angle and how it was, yeah, it just had to be so precise in order to get the images. But then as you're talking, I'm thinking back, well, you've already gone through a large stage of adjustment from, glass plates and no pixels to digital imagery via digital camera. So do you think maybe that transition in photographic medium, I don't even know, this is not in my expertise. I'm throwing terms out there that might be wrong, but does having gone through that transition and kind of the processes used, I guess in some ways sets a precedence that you can become open to new technologies or new ways of doing it moving forward? I'm wondering if either of you could speak to that a little. The initial change from glass plates to what I'm assuming was would have been print photos and then digital, or kind of what have the changes been over time?
Well, I'm reflecting on your time, Jeanine, in a double wall black silk tent on the mountaintop, changing sheet film back in the late 90s. Do you want to talk about a little bit about the transition?
Sure. I mean, I think this is the kind of where it started, right? So originally, the surveyors would have they had these like wooden boxes, and they would carry glass plate negatives. I think they could carry a dozen of them on their backs and would come up onto the mountains and take their pictures. And you can certainly see some of the challenges. Not a lot, but enough of the glass plate negatives when we see them are cracked, or you could see just kind of how difficult it would have been to work with that technology. The emulsions on them would have been an emulsion that would have been spread on top of them. So they're just really, it's kind of like the beginning, the early days of photography. And so when we started, we were lucky to get a large format. So it was 4 inches by 5 inches. It would have been sheet film. And so again, you would have, and you saw the picture, Eric showed it, and then you had cassettes. And so like there were cassettes about this size. And then in a dark room, nobody remembers what a dark room is anymore, but we had a dark room in the basement of one of our field research stations at the Palisade Center at Jasper National Park. And so I would go down, and you could load a piece of sheet film onto each side of that cassette. That had to be done in the dark. And so you do that, and then we would come up and take the pictures, and you would load the cassette. And then when it was all set up, ready to go in the viewfinder, you were seeing everything upside down and backwards, trying to line up your pictures. And then you would pull out kind of for the sheet film, and you would expose it, and then you could flip it around and do the other side. And we only ever had, the mountaintops had about 12 views that were taken from them. And so when you're working with sheet film, and it was expensive and it was hard to bring up, so you would basically have 12 sheets of film plus a couple extras. And then we had this portable darkroom that was basically a black bag. And on the days that we ran out of film for whatever reason, or something awful happened, something went wrong, then I would be there in the field with my hands inside this black bag and trying to change the film, because of course it had to be done in the dark. And so that was where we started. Those original images we shot them in black and white so that they would be comparable. And then I think sometime after that, Eric, you guys shifted over to when digital technology and photography technology came on. And one of the things Eric showed, again, like just the incredible detail that you can get with those old photographs, right? Taken 100 years ago. It's not pixels, but like the emulsion is so fine that you can zoom into those images and really see incredible amount of detail before it gets too grainy. And so then you guys switched to digital photography. And I think in the early days, we were really worried that we weren't going to be able to get that same level of detail. And maybe you can talk about that transition, Eric.
Sure. What was compelling about the first professional digital cameras like the Nikon D1 was the exposure value variation that was so much greater with digital. even back then with the earlier digital sensors. If you're shooting film, black and white film, you've got the ability to be 1 or 2 stops over or under the proper exposure and still get usable images. With digital cameras, we were starting to see as much as 9 or 10 stops under and over. So you could have a photograph with a valley, a distant valley in cloud shadow or shadow where you couldn't see anything but black. And we could work with that and pull data out of that. And that's what turned my heart around on digital. I was a skeptic, but that's what turned my heart around on it, because I thought, wow, we can really do something with this. So our first digital camera, I don't know if Bruce, you remember this, if you're still on the call, but we spent the most amount of money I've spent on a single piece of research equipment until last week, but which was $35,000 on a Hasselblad camera. It was the first field portable digital high resolution camera system, 2003. And it was, are you ready for this? 16 megapixels. So, you know, and it was a monster. We called it the Swedish princess. It was, yeah, it acted up a lot. And we were, we didn't have compact flash cards large enough at the time to hold the images that sensor was throwing off. So we had to have a battery powered portable hard drive taped to the tripod leg to download the images. So not ideal. And now fast forward 20 years, we're into working with excellent, we use Fuji GFX cameras. They're just spectacular medium format cameras. They're weather sealed. They're optically wonderful. We really like them. And so, but comparing the change from film photography, which is continuous tone photography, so chemical basically, and you're dealing with grain size, to digital photography, which is pixels, it's a little bit like the difference between vinyl and, you know, CDs. It's sort of like that, right? And there's a lot of me that really loves the look, the feel, and the quality of the original glass plate negatives and some of the film work we did. But it's entirely without debate now that the high resolution digital cameras offer us so much in terms of what we can do research-wise with these images. That's a long-winded answer. It's the problem if you ask us about cameras.
It's interesting to think about the crowdsourcing though, right? Because like on one hand, and we've done one of Eric's master students, Julie Fortin, did some work about, you know, we get to the top of the mountain, we got to figure out where it is that the photograph is actually going to be. And that work can actually take hours to do. And so you get up there, and the difference when you got your camera, the difference of having it here versus shifting it even just 10 centimeters to the right or to the left or up or down can really change what it is that you're seeing in the image. And it's a little bit for the distance, but for the photographs that have foreground in them, if you're seeing any kind of rocks in the foreground, and you will have seen some of the pictures that we presented, right? Sometimes just shifting the camera a little bit that way can completely change kind of the angle that foreground rock is and where it lines up. And so you can run yourself into problems. And it can be very difficult to figure out exactly where the surveyors were, because you get to the top of the mountain and sometimes they're quite flat on top. But if you photograph it and you're not quite in the right space, then when you show people the repeat images, if there's like a foreground rock that's a little bit off, like I know that I'm within a meter of where that original surveyor was, which, like, how incredible is that 100 years later? But people looking at the image will be like, well, you weren't quite in the right place. And so it can kind of like, like the credibility, all of a sudden you lose it, even though you know that, oh my gosh, I spent 3 hours up there and we tried every spot. And so it's kind of interesting to think with the crowdsourcing, you can imagine like it'd be amazing to take advantage of like all the mountaineers who are out there who are climbing these peaks, because it is a lot of physical exertion to get up to these places. So wouldn't it be great if they could just snap some pictures? But of course, it's not clear that they have the time or the inclination to really figure that out. And on one hand, maybe we don't need that level. You know, maybe it's worth starting to think about, well, we could crowdsource some of this, and then at least we would have some more repeat images, right? We have another 90 or 100,000 repeat images or old historical images that we don't have the repeats for. And so maybe there's a way that we can have kind of like a research grade repeat photographs and crowdsource grade, so that at least we do start to build out that collection so that they can be useful for things, you know, like Chris was talking about, for like communicating with the public. So I don't know, something to think about.
Thanks, Jeanine. We are at time, but on that note, yeah, it's such an amazing project, and I think speaks to the amount of work and research and dedication that's gone into it. The technological advancements and these software like Claire's developing, I think are getting us to the point where crowdsourcing can become a viable option. And some of these automated classification schemes and stuff, and helping with georeferencing and location, like I think we're getting there, right? Which is really exciting and opens up a whole new world of opportunity. So I would like to thank everyone who stuck with us for the full time. And I would especially like to thank Eric and Jeanine for taking the time out of their Friday morning to share this. Amazing presentations, super exciting. I'm really looking forward to this fall's webinar series and really showcasing all of the amazing people and projects coming out of the Canada Wildfire NSERC Strategic Network. So thank you, Eric and Jeanine, for kicking us off. We hope to hear more. If anyone has questions that we didn't get to, you can email them over to wildfire@ualberta.ca, and I'll make sure to get them over to Eric and Jeanine. And for those of you who ended up here by means other than a Canada Wildfire announcement, we do have a subscription list where we send out an email once a month, letting people know about opportunities, webinars, research, things like that. So if you'd like to be in the know, the link is in the chat as well. I've also included links to as many of the things I could catch as Eric and Jeanine were talking, whether it's research papers, websites, things like that in the chat. When we do share the video on YouTube sometime next week, I'll be sure to include those links as well. So if you didn't catch them, you should be able to catch them there. Any last minute words from Eric or Jeanine, or? Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, huge thank you. Yeah, no, it's great. Thank you. And I just wanted to say that interagency and intersectoral collaboration is brilliant. It's wonderful, and it worked really well this summer. So thanks for that.
Yeah, this is a great example of people at the heart of a project and how amazing it can be when you're open and collaborative and work together. So thank you to both of you for setting that precedence for this project, right? You have to be there in the first place. Hi, Bruce. I get really smile when I see Bruce. Okay, thanks everyone. Take care, and we'll see you hopefully next month. Bye, everyone.